So up to this we have understood, right, what do you mean by exception and exception handling. Okay, how can we handle the exception? By using the try and catch block. Okay, inside the try block we will write the risky code, and inside the catch block we will write the handling code or handling logic. Okay. Now see, now we understood what do you mean by exception and what do you mean by exception handling. Okay, now in order to work with exception, Java people has provided some predefined classes. What do you mean by predefined classes? Okay, see, let's say I'm writing here class test. Okay, public static void main of string array of args, system dot out dot println of I, let's say. Okay, now if you see here, you are writing something called string itself or not. What do you mean by string? So string is nothing but it's a predefined class. Predefined class means this class is already being defined by the Java people itself. I have not written this string class. Already this class is being provided by the Java people. So that means there is a class is there with the name as string itself, and this class is being provided by the Java people already. Okay, so that is nothing but predefined class. Similarly, you are writing system.out.println. If you see here, this system is nothing but a class itself or not. So this is again a predefined class. Predefined class means already this class is being defined by the Java people itself. Okay, so working with this Java API, Java people has provided lot of predefined classes like your object class, string class, string buffer, string builder, okay, thread, runnable, callable. These are the interfaces. Okay, you will have array list, linked list. Okay, so there are lot of predefined classes has been provided by the Java people itself. Okay, so similarly, there in order to work with this exception, Java people has provided bunch of predefined classes. Okay, in order to handle the respective exception type, Java people has provided the respective exception classes itself. Okay, so what I mean is, you faced one arithmetic exception, right? So what do you mean by this arithmetic exception? That is nothing but again it is a class only. Okay, so in order to work with this exception, Java people has provided some classes, predefined classes. Okay, who is the parent class of all the classes? You are having one class called object class, right? This object class is nothing but parent class of all the classes. Let's say I am writing here one class called class A. So that means this class A is nothing but child class of object class only. If I am writing class B, it is also a child class of object. Whatever, if you are writing any class, each and every class is the child class is nothing but child class of object class. Okay, so in order to work with this exception, again, who is the parent class of all the exception class is nothing but they have defined one class called throwable class. Okay, so Java people has provided one class called throwable class. So they have defined one class is nothing but throwable itself. The class name itself is nothing but throwable. Okay, so this is nothing but predefined class only. Okay, so this class is nothing but parent class of all the exception classes. Okay, for this throwable class, there is one child class you are having is nothing but exception class. Okay, so there is one class called exception class, and for this exception class there are several child classes are also there. Like you are having a runtime exception, Okay, you are having servlet exception, you are having SQL exception, you are having IO exception. Okay, child class of this IO exception is nothing but file not found exception. You are also having class not found exception. Okay, so there are a lot for this. Not only this much, there are several other exception classes are also there, and these classes are nothing but child class of this exception. And for this exception class, who is the parent class? Throwable. For this throwable, who is the parent class? Is nothing but your object class. So object is nothing but your super class for all the classes. Okay, so that means this is the exception class hierarchy. Okay, if you see here, for this runtime exception also there are several child classes you are having, like you are having arithmetic exception, okay, you will have null pointer exception, okay, you will have class cast exception, you are having array index of bound exception, and so on. Okay, there are again lot of classes are also there. Okay, so this is nothing but your exception class, exception hierarchy. As part of this exception hierarchy, who is the parent class of all the exception class is nothing but throwable. Okay, who is the parent class of throwable is nothing but object. Okay, object is nothing but super class of all the classes. If I am asking who is the parent class of all the exception class, you can say like throwable. Okay, for this throwable there is a child class is nothing but exception. Okay, for this exception there are several child classes you are having, like you are having runtime exception, servlet exception, SQL exception, IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception. So these are the child classes of this exception class. Similarly, there are several child classes are also there, is nothing but run with respect to the child class of this runtime exception is nothing but arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, class cast exception, array index of bound exception, and there are several exception classes are there also. Okay, here also there are several exception classes are there also. Okay, so this is nothing but exception hierarchy. Okay, how you are having a class called throwable, similarly you are having a class called exception, you are having a class called runtime exception, you are having a class called servlet exception, you are having a class called SQL exception, you are having a class called null pointer exception. So these are nothing but your predefined class. These classes have been provided by the Java people itself as part of this JDK. When you install the JDK, right, there is a rt.jar file, it will come. Inside this rt.jar file, all these classes are defined. Okay, all these classes are there. Okay, so this is nothing but exception hierarchy. Okay, so we understood what do you mean by exception. What do you mean by exception? If there is some issue, okay, because of some piece of code, if your program is getting terminated abnormally, you are not getting the smooth execution, that is nothing but your exception. Okay, and how you are going to handle that exception is nothing but exception handling. Okay, and how you are going to handle that exception? By using the try and catch block. Okay, now who is the parent class of all the exception class is nothing but throwable. Who is the child class of this throwable class is nothing but exception. Who is the child class of this exception class is nothing but runtime exception, servlet exception, SQL exception, file not found exception, IO exception, class not found exception, like this. Who is the child class? Who are the child class of this runtime exception is nothing but null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, class cast exception. Okay, so these are nothing but runtime exception child classes. Right? Now let's try to understand. Okay, we understood exception, right? We understood exception. Again, exception is classified into two types. Okay, one is checked exception, one is unchecked exception. Okay, so this exception is getting this exception. It is not a class I am talking about. The exception itself. What do you mean by exception? Some issue. Okay, so how many types of exceptions you are having? So that what I mean is these are the exception. Okay, now these exceptions are classified into two types. One is checked exception, one is unchecked exception. Okay, what do you mean by checked exception? What do you mean by unchecked exception? Let's try to understand. It's a very important concept. Try to understand. This exception is nothing but how many types? Two types. What do you mean by how? What are those? Checked exception and unchecked exception. Okay. Now, if you'll see here, this servlet exception, SQL exception, IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception. These exception classes are nothing but child class of this exception class itself or not. Okay. First of all, let's try to understand how you are going to identify the respective exception class is a checked exception or this exception class is nothing but unchecked exception. How you are going to identify. Okay. If any exception class, if you see here, all these exception class which are directly child class of this exception class is nothing but your checked exception. Okay, what do you mean by checked exception and how you are going? What I have not explained yet. What do you mean by checked exception? As of now, I am just trying to explain how you are going to identify the respective exception class is a checked exception type or unchecked exception type. Okay, if you see, let's say SQL exception. If you go to this SQL exception class, you will find this SQL exception is extending which class? Exception class. So that means it is a directly child class of this exception class or not. So then you can identify like it is a checked exception. Okay. Then how can you identify the respective exception class is nothing but unchecked exception or not? So if you will see here, all these classes, whoever the classes or exception classes are nothing but directly child class of this runtime exception. This type of exception is nothing but we are calling it as nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, so what do you mean by checked exception and how you are going to identify the respective class is a checked exception type or not? If that class is child class of this exception, so that means it is a checked exception. If the class is nothing but child class of runtime exception, so that is nothing but unchecked exception. That is how you can identify. Now let's try to understand what do you mean by checked exception and what do you mean by unchecked exception. Okay, see, what do you mean by checked exception? Checked exception is nothing but the exception which will be checked by the compiler is nothing but checked exception. Okay, and what do you mean by unchecked exception? The exception which will not checked by the compiler is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, so okay, how many types of exceptions we are having? There are two types of exception. What are those? Checked exception and unchecked exception. First we understood how can we identify this is a checked exception class, checked exception type or unchecked exception type. Any exception class is a child class of this exception class, so that means it is nothing but your checked exception. Okay, if any class is a child class, directly child class of this runtime exception, so that means it is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, now what do you mean by checked exception? This checked exception, it will be checked by the compiler. Okay, and this unchecked exception is nothing but which will not checked by the compiler, that is nothing but unchecked exception. That does not mean this checked exception is a compile time exception, unchecked exception is a runtime exception. It is not like that. Okay, always remember the exception will occur at the runtime only. Okay, there will be no compile time exception will occur. Okay, always remember exception will occur at the runtime while you are performing the execution. At the time of execution only you will face the exception. Okay. At the compile time you will get only compilation error, not exception. Okay. Always remember exception will occur at the runtime. Okay, so that means, so then what do you mean by checked exception, and why I am telling like this checked exception will be checked by the compiler? See, at the runtime you should not face any exception. That is why compiler will check that one. Okay, what I mean is, let's say at the runtime some exception occur, compiler will force you to handle the exception. Compiler will ask, hey, you are writing this piece of code, there might be some exception will occur at the runtime because of this piece of code. So then where is your handling code? Where you are handling that exception? Tell me that handling code where you have written. Okay, so that is nothing but checked exception. Whether you are handling that exception or not, that will be checked by the compiler. Okay, see, for example, you are going from your home to office, right? So when you are traveling itself, there is a police here. Okay, right? So when you are traveling, before traveling itself, your friend will ask, hey, take this helmet so that you will not face any exception at the runtime. Okay, so that is why who is checking? Your friend is checking whether you are taking the helmet or not. Okay, or whether you are taking the precaution so that you should not face any exception itself at the runtime. Okay, at the runtime you should not face any exception. That will be checked by the compiler. Okay, so that is why checked exception is nothing but compiler will force you to handle the exception. Okay, already compiler knows some piece of code, because of this piece of code you will get the you might get the exception. Okay, if you are writing that piece of code, then compiler will force you to handle the exception. Okay, let me try to explain through a program. You will be able to understand.